Welcome, everyone, to Ask the Experts podcast. Really excited for our guest today and really excited the conversations we're going to have. But we want to acknowledge you for taking out your time week in and week out to listen, learn, and grow. And growth is where it's about, and we want to give you value. So we want to bring on amazing guests to the show that's really going to help you to change your life, elevate your success in life and in business. My guest today is Lynn Peyton. Lynn has worked in the health sector, in the health and social services space, whereby she has held both operational and strategic management responsibilities. Lynn has, in about 20 years ago, Lynn established her own business consultancy, whereby she trained managers, senior levels, and organizations to really achieve major success and results from Lynn's leadership. And so I'm really excited to also share with you, she has a top core leadership program that she is unveiling, and I really want to dive into as to what she is doing. So the program is what she focuses on are managers at all senior levels and organizations, whereby they want to improve the culture, their attitude, the confidence and performance outcomes. So I'm excited to welcome Lynn Peyton. Welcome to the show, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Alka, for that very generous introduction. It's lovely to see you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for being here, and always good to see you. Now, we've met at many events. Chicago was the first time we met, and then continuously we meet. But, that's what the life of entrepreneurship is. You never know as to where you're going to meet people. So it's so good. Lynn, I want you to share with our audience your backstory. How did your journey begin as to what you are doing today?
Sure. So I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I always wanted to do language. I was really good at languages, so I could envisage myself as a language teacher, French and German. And I could see myself in Paris, as a French assistant and all. I always loved a bit of style, Alka. So my career aspirations kind of reflected that. And then the summer I finished high school, I worked in a holiday camp in England. 7 of us went over, and that just exposed me to a whole side of life that I'd never been exposed to before. We had a very working class background, strong on values, but not financially that well off. When I went away to this holiday camp, I realized just how sheltered it had been. So there were people there who were in seasonal jobs who had no home. They always had to take jobs where the accommodation came with the job. And that just seemed so incredibly uncertain. There were people who had served jail time. There were people who were literally just drifting through life, and some with quite extensive issues and problems. And I thought, gosh, there's a whole lot more to life than I know anything about. So I saved up and I got the boat back from England to Northern Ireland. And I persuaded them at university to let me change my course. And this was like 3 weeks to go. They let me change my course from languages to social science. And that has just been the most amazing journey. So I was a social worker, still a social worker, but I haven't practiced for years. I was trained in social work, worked in social work for 20 something years. And as you said in your intro, I was always trying to grow and develop. So it was always what's next. So I would, change jobs so that I could learn more. And I ended up managing services in Belfast during a time when there was considerable political unrest. I went from that to a strategic management job for a bigger chunk of Northern Ireland. And that was fascinating because that was all about determining what the need was, where the services were and what could we do strategically in partnership with other organizations to actually close that gap a little bit. And that also involved working cross-border, working with other countries. And then because increasingly when we tried to get Northern Ireland back on its feet, we had access to peace monies from Europe. Then we did business with countries in Europe as well. So it was a fascinating journey. Then for a couple of years, I was director of a not-for-profit organization. And when I did my first Tony Robbins event in Geneva in 1999, I made three critical decisions. One, I was going to stop smoking. Two, I was going to stop drinking coffee. And the third one was I wasn't ever going to work for anybody else again once I had the money to set up my own business. So that's what I did. So in 2001, I set up the consultancy. And I still love consulting to that sector: child protection, fostering children's services, and mental health agencies.
Beautiful. Love that story. Very inspiring. Obviously, it takes a lot to, during that period in Northern Ireland when it's going through a lot of political unrest, and there were a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to happen. There was, no one knew as to what was going to happen. So during that time and everything that has led you to what you have accomplished, takes a lot of drive, and there's a mindset, as you mentioned, you and Tony Robbins, that also elevated you to what you really wanted to do. What was that passion that really held inside of you that that makes you? So can you share with us, what are the three principles that you live by today? What were the three principles that you were living by, knowing that your life was going to change for the better?
I think my father always said the only day he was beaten was the day he didn't show up. So he always said, if you go, you have a chance of winning, of getting whatever it is you need to get done. But if you don't show up, you have no chance. So I always showed up, regardless of what the situation, I always showed up. I think the next thing was I just love people. And again, coming from a family background of, in a very divisive society, we were always brought up to treat everybody equally and with respect, regardless of their politics, their religion, their background, whatever. And then the third thing I think is always be true to yourself. If other things are uncertain, a word that you used earlier, you can have the certainty of your own integrity and knowing that whatever you do, it's going to be aligned with your values.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it's always about the values that you really want to, keep in check. And oftentimes, we get so lost into what we are doing that we lose track of what is our value. What do we really stand for? What do we really believe in? So, absolutely, your values. And I want to talk about also, Lynn, I want to acknowledge you as well. You have built, you established your consultancy business 20 years ago, 2001, and you have elevated and, built organizations, team members to elevate them so that they are more productive in the workplace. So, can you share with us, how do you navigate the mental and the health and the mental weight of a team member, of an employee in the organization?
So I think this is coming back to values again. I always believe my role as someone who's coaching, mentoring, or developing teams, my role is to empower everybody to get to the place where they can function much more effectively and function without me, because we're not building a job for life as a consultant. We're hoping that people grow enough where they can integrate the learning and move on. So in terms of navigating, what each organization needs. The number one issue there is we always need to sit down and listen and hear what's going on from their perspective. I think as coaches and mentors, we have to stop assuming we know things, and we have to actually learn from the people who are in the organization what it is they feel they need. Now, I think when we meet the needs that they want met, then we can add on some of the things that we as consultants can see they also need. But it's always about start where the client is. And usually for organizations, that's about knowing what their pain points are.
Mm-hmm.
And in the health and social care sector, their pain points over time have been fairly consistent, and it's around recruiting and retaining high quality staff. It's about ensuring that their staff grow and develop and there are succession arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also about managing within constrained budgets. So those tend to be the issues that come up all the time.
Right. And listening is a bigger factor. You know, most bosses in organizations don't really want to listen to the employee, but I think that's where the company can fall back, because if you're not paying attention to the employee's needs, to their, during COVID, a lot of people had, they weren't really able to, it was that isolation period that we all went through. But COVID was a great example that, whatever people are going through, you want to make sure that you're listening to the issues that's happening internally, because what's happening internally, right? So that's going to affect your work performance.
You're absolutely spot on there, Alka. And in fact, one of the organizations I worked with during COVID was the unions. And and it was really, really interesting, because we had to do these as Zoom sessions, so they were online workshops. And you were absolutely right. Everybody's reason for not wanting to come back into the office. This was when, do you remember those early attempts when people were encouraged to go back to the office?
Yes.
Everybody's reason was different.
Right.
So you had to really understand, and whenever you and I are giving presentations, we're always trying to look at what's in it for them. But it was so important during COVID and the aftermath of COVID that we really heard how COVID impacted people, what the challenges were for them currently, and what it would be like and what would need to happen for them to safely. And I think one of the things that was underestimated during COVID was the psychological safety aspect, both for people working at home, but also the fear of coming back to work.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. A lot of people did not want to go back because, they never knew. I think people did not realize as to what can happen. So yeah, the safety aspect was sure, but, the mental, the health and well-being of individuals really has to, had to take precedent. And even now in the organizations, bosses, managers, senior level executives need to pay attention to that. So Lynn, can you share with us what are the skills that's required as to, whether you're a small company, a mid-size, or a large organization, where the company needs to be and where the company needs to go, and they're expanding perhaps. Can you share with us what are the skill sets that's required for any company?
So I work primarily in my own niche area. So that's organizations, both statutory and not-for-profit, who provide services for children and families, and those that provide mental health services. So I did do small business coaching for a time, and I realized that my passion and my heart was really in working with the service industries in health and social care. So I kind of restricted my business to that, because there's more than enough work in that sector. And I always feel there's still so much to do, Alka.
Right.
So it's my belief that in those organizations, you need to be really good at running a business, because those organizations are businesses as well. And one of my CEO clients recently completed her MBA. She came back and she said, "Now I know all the things that you were talking about." And I said, "Well, tell me, which part of the MBA was most relevant to your organization and your role as CEO?" And she said, "All of it. You need the finance, you need
Right.
the project management, you need the organization development, you need the strategic planning, you need the business planning, you need the staff well-being." So the answer to your question is all of that. I focus particularly on honing people's leadership skills. And I believe across organization and across industry, those are still the same. So bearing in mind, we've already said you must know all the business skills, but you've got to really be a good leader and a good people person. So for me, the people skills are about that's why I developed the core program. They need to be brilliant communicators. Leaders need to know how to communicate. And we manage things and we lead people. So in order to lead people, we have to build relationships with them. So the R's for relationships, the O is for optimization of everything at our disposal. And that's not just the budget, but that's really important. We have to optimize our own energy. We have to optimize our time. I think the probably the mini course that I do most often is time management. And it's not just about time, it's about managing your energy, because energy goes where follows focus. So the focus comes from the passion and the belief and the wanting to do a great job. But you have to optimize something you mentioned already, Alka. You have to optimize your mindset. You have to believe in the art of the possible. And then the E is for evaluation, because we have to evaluate the impact of everything we do. If we try something, we need to check that it's working before we throw more resources at it. And I find that in some organizations, they've been doing things the same way for years and years and years without questioning it and without listening to the people on the ground or the middle managers. So it's really important that we're constantly evaluating. And I have a very, very simple theory on this. We all need to figure out what's working and do more of it. And we need to figure out what's not working and stop doing it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listening to also your customers. I think companies just going to sort of sidetrack a little bit, but pertains to the same thing, whether it's companies, organizations, brands. Why do certain brands just go out of business? Why do they? The Hudson Bay here in Toronto, they've gone bankrupt. They're just gonna, it is so sad just to hear that. But what happened? I think sometimes what some companies do, in the case of Hudson's Bay, I believe that they grew too quick. I think they introduced Nordstrom. So maybe sometimes, you've got to listen to your customers, listen to the feedback, listen to what your employees are saying to you. So that does not only happen at the top tier level, but also at the bottom, listening to everyone in the food chain can really help people, individuals, and the company is going to thrive as a result.
And the reason for that, and you're absolutely right, Alka, is that organizations have to stay relevant. And how can they stay relevant if they're not in touch with their customer base? You and I both know how critically important it is that we scale organizations. But if you don't manage the pace of the growth and make sure that you don't overextend financially, then that can be so critically damaging. I'm sad to hear that Hudson's Bay actually went bankrupt. I worked in Toronto. A second holiday job I had was actually working in Toronto
Really? Oh,
in my
nice.
first year of university, because my aunt lived in Don Mills.
Okay.
and I worked in a dry cleaner store in Toronto. I think the biggest learning from that was I never wanted to work in a dry cleaning store again. Not in the summer, not in the summer.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. That's so good. What university did you go to?
I went to university in Belfast, but in the after the first year, I got a summer job working in Toronto.
Okay, amazing. That's so good. You have run a successful organization. You led, team members, managers at all levels. So I'm just curious to know how do you assess the abilities of an individual so that they become the person who they need to be, to become the leader that they need to be? How would you assess? Do you have a certain criteria that you use to measure how people can lead or can become a good leaders?
Well, I think an essential tool, I don't think, first of all, I like people to do their own self-evaluation. So I
Right.
think scaling questions are great. So in a workshop, I might check out, well, what do people think are the leadership skills? And they would jot them down, we'd put them up in a flip chart. And then I'd say, well, can we prioritize them? And then I could do an exercise that said, okay, on a scale of 5 to 10, rate yourself on each of these leadership skills. And that's really good because now people have to learn to be reflective in terms of their own skills and abilities. And I always say on a scale of 5 to 10, because I mean, there are people who are already in leadership positions. So
Mhm.
we have to assume they're at least at the midway point. And if somebody is feeling down and they rate themselves as a 1, it feels hopeless. But if you're a 5 on a scale of 5 to 10, well, that's okay. We're halfway. And then my next question is always, so if you're a 5, how do you get to a 6? If you're a
Right,
7, how do you get to an 8?
right.
Because we want to look for that incremental growth that
Mhm.
is within their reach, which they can see as a potential. And even at that, I'll say to them, well, if you're a 5 now, what's your goal? Where do you want to get to in the next 6 months? And let them choose. Some of them will say 6, some of them will say 8. But the
Right,
next question is always the same, okay, what needs to happen for
right.
you to get there? And again, I use a mainly coaching modality where then they start to figure out, well, I need to do this, I need to do that, and we can go from there to a plan.
Exactly. How do you also have there been times that, when you have assessed individuals and you find that maybe they have not come up to par, they have the abilities, they have the potential to really go far in the organization, but oftentimes they may lack a certain, maybe a motivation, or maybe they don't lack a drive to pull them forward. How do you pull people up so that they have the potential to really excel?
Well, you use the word that is most critical there, Alka, which is motivation. And you can take ducks to water, but you can't make them drink. So it is really important. So it's around finding out, why is the motivation so low? What else is going on? It could be
Mhm.
that they're not ready, so we can get them to identify the skills and work on those. It can also be it's a lifetime, or it's a family matter, or there are other things going on that prohibits them right now. I always want people to think, though, well, what can we do to grow in the meantime, even if you're not ready to go for the next position?
Mhm.
And some people, I have seen situations where people have challenged themselves to go for the next promotion when they weren't ready. And the challenge with that is often it doesn't just impact them negatively, it can impact the people that they're leading negatively. And some people have been able to make good decisions and take a step back or sideways or into something else. I think the other thing is, in the health and social care sector, it's very much people need to be there to serve. Um, and we can serve in all kinds of ways. we need really good practitioners. We need people who are really hands-on with patients and clients and service users. And people with those skills need to be supported to stay and to feel valued in those roles. And we don't need a title. I love Robin Sharma's book, The Leader with No Title. We
Mhm.
don't need a title to be a leader. We show up as leaders with
Right.
our confidence, our competence, our communication skills, our service, our commitment to the organization, our commitment to service users.
Right, exactly. And I've always been curious to know, and a lot of people people have said leaders are born. And I'm of the theory you're not born a leader, you're created a leader. Can you share your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think some leaders are born intuitively, instinctively, they have all that skill set. But leadership qualities can be learned and practiced and honed and developed. Yeah. And I know that the more we practice something, the more natural it becomes.
Mhm.
And then your leadership skills become more natural as well.
Exactly. Lynn, you have led, organizations, and currently, you're working in you worked in the health and social services sector, led huge organizations. I'm curious to know what the habits that you have adopted that, and now, watching your journey with you and your husband, what you have created, both of you together, it's just truly remarkable. So I'm just curious to know as to what are your habits that you have implemented in the past? What are the habits that you play today, the A game that you have? I'm just curious to know as to what has supported you in the past, and share that with us.
Sure, sure. And my organization is really small, but the organizations that I support and work with could be fairly large public sector organizations or not-for-profits. I just wanted to finish off that last conversation.
Sure,
What
yes.
what works best is if I can do like a whole organization approach. So I coach the area manager or the regional manager, work on building a really strong top team that are all facing the same direction. So you could have somebody who's responsible for fostering, somebody who's responsible for children in care, someone who's responsible for screening referrals at the front door, someone who's responsible for the interface with mental health. But all of them have to feel like they're a part of the leadership team. And all of them have to be committed to the core principles of supporting and empowering their staff, delivering good quality services, living within budget, managing the resources they have available to them, and troubleshooting and problem solving in a way that creates learning
Right.
and hope, as opposed to being a blaming organization. So it works best if I can work with, because culture flows downhill. It works really best if I can work with them at all levels, then the middle managers and the frontline managers. But if we can all get on the same page and agree what the values are so that people feel engaged in something that is bigger than themselves. So your question was, what are my habits?
Yes.
Well, first of all, start early. I think, getting so much done before the phone rings in the morning, um, being clear about my agenda for the week and for the day, and checking in at the end of the day and really celebrating if I got like 80% of it done. We always, Rodney and I always do at December, we plan our next year. I mean, I think we used to plan 5 years ahead, but we've sort of ticked all those boxes. The kids are all gone and married and whatever. So we have planned all of our holidays for next year. So I think always having something to look forward to, but we start early. I'm 72 and Rodney is 76. So everybody thinks we should have been retired years ago. But what would you do? I love my life. I love thinking I'm still adding value. And the other thing, so it's starting early being disciplined about planning and having goals. It's about always learning something new. So I did a zip line for the first time ever
Oh,
when I was in Australia. I persuaded my daughter-in-law to do it. We climbed a bridge and we zip lined over the river, you
wow.
know. So I'm committed to doing something I haven't done before every year. And I think persistence is the other thing. I don't give up. I figure it out and kind of get on with it. The other thing that has sustained me, which was the other part of your question, is having a great network of wonderful people. And some of those are like people that your life could depend on. I've had my Tony Robbins coach for more than 20 years, and she's a very dear friend, but she would never let me off the hook if I needed that push. And I've another very dear coach, very dear friend and coach, and we coach each other once a month. And I have other people who are my go-to people. And you and I share our wealth and business coach in the JT Fox world. And I love Brent as well. So I have my go-to people because we were never meant to do this on our own. And whenever we get stuck, that's okay. I get stuck all the time. That doesn't demean me. It just means there's something I haven't learned yet. So I go, who can I ask about that? So I'm always willing to ask and to learn and to continue to do new things.
Lynn, I have to commend you. I have to compliment you. You are 76.
No, I'm 72.
But you look fantastic. You look fantastic.
Well, I was at my armchair aerobics this morning. The other thing I do, and that sounds as if it's for old people, but it's not really. It's really a workout. We must have done 100 squats. You know, it just makes you think that you're going to be sitting. It's not like that. So I do 3 exercise classes a week, and I walk 10,000 steps every day. The other
Beautiful.
thing that I think organizations have become much more committed to is their staff well-being.
Mhm.
And if you and I don't model that, then how can we encourage other people to do it? So I get my sleep, I drink plenty of water, I walk every day, I do my exercises, and I eat well. And that's really about reducing sugar.
Absolutely. Well, incredible, Lynn. That is so good. But I absolutely agree with you. You know, everything that we want to do, whether it's in a company, in the organizations, whether it's in our businesses, really has to stem from within us. We have to lead by example. And I think oftentimes that's missed. That's missed everywhere, even the corporations. People don't want to do that, but they expect of their employees or the team members. But you have to be the one. You got to be the walk and talk of your company, your brand with anything. So that is so good. Cultivate those habits, because even during COVID, the mental health and wellness of individuals, really impacted. But, isolation was there. And I think also, would you say that when people did go back to work, it was a very difficult transition for most people after COVID to really get into grips with the work performance? Would you say that was the reality?
It really was a challenge. There were the
Yeah.
people who um, actually never wanted to not be in the office and had to be supported in staying home some days. Um, then there were the people who had got used to remote working. So the challenge really was rebuilding the team because people had gotten out of the habit, and good team leaders tried to keep their team involved and engaged. But a lot of team leaders find that hard.
Mhm.
So the challenge really was not just with integrating individuals, but recreating and rebuilding teams. So I did a lot of work with people post-COVID about respecting everybody's differences, but getting a firm commitment that it was mandatory that on Wednesdays everybody was in the office. And that was the day that not did we just have the team meeting, but we also had lunch. So we embraced the social side of it as well.
Right. Exactly. how can individuals, or how can corporations really instill that culture? Because you talked about, culture is how you built, when you would go to the organization, build the team members and managers at all levels so that they can change the culture, team members gain the confidence and performance. How can they start to instill what needs to happen? Can you share one idea that they can do today?
Well, first of all, culture is how people experience the organization. I mean, you can have all your fancy definitions, but culture is really what it feels like to the people who work there.
Mhm.
And we can create a culture within individual teams that is more protective and healthier maybe than the overall organizational culture. I think the key thing is leading with integrity.
Mhm.
It's following through. It's saying what you're going to do and then do what you said you would
Right.
do.
Yes.
And so that people trust. Now, I love Stephen Covey's work on trust. It's an amazing book from about 15 years ago called The Speed of Trust. And he said trust depends on intent, integrity, competent track record, and competence. I probably didn't get those all right, but it was basically that your people will follow you if your intent is pure. So even if you tell them that they have to do something they don't want to do, they'll go, well, you know what, you can trust Alka because in the past she said this and she followed through. So don't particularly want to do this, but I know in the past her intent has always been pure.
Mhm.
Your integrity. If they know that you're honest, that you deliver, that you do what you say, track record is hugely important. So if something goes wrong and they'll say, well, it's not like Alka to do that because in the past she has
Right. Yeah.
always.
Mhm.
But if your track record has always been, well, you couldn't depend on Lynn because, several times in the past she said, and she didn't do it, then it doesn't matter what the next thing I do is. People are going to judge me against my track record. And the other thing is competence. People want to follow leaders who show that they understand the job and they can do the job. So I think that's how trust is built. So what organizations need to do is work on building trust. And that can be at the top of the organization or it can be in every individual team. And then it comes right down to you and me. Are we trustworthy as individual team members?
Absolutely. I think it comes down to, trust has to come down. It has to be within you, because if you don't trust, the moment you say you don't trust someone, well, are you really trusting yourself? And I think that's also a core that I often, reflect on. If I'm saying that to someone that I don't trust you, well, then do I really trust myself?
And I think a great question for everybody to ask themselves is, how can I be more trustworthy?
Yes.
And when somebody says to me, I don't trust Sam or Fred or whatever, I would say, well, what would he need to do for
Yes.
you to trust him? And
Mhm.
is that something that you've talked about? And it can be the simplest things. People lose trust because somebody's timekeeping's poor. Well, have you had that conversation? People lose trust because somebody left while there was still a crisis going on. Well, did they have to get home to a child or a babysitter or
Mhm.
whatever? And all the time, it's, have you had the conversation? Now, you and I have both interviewed Gabe Carp recently.
Yes.
And that was amazing. And he always says that the tension arises in the space between our expectations and reality.
Reality.
But
Yes.
whose reality are we talking about? We're always talking about our reality. We
Right.
have to learn more. And back to that listening, we have to learn more about the other person's reality.
Yeah, put yourself in people's shoes. If you don't put yourself in people's shoes, then you're just assuming that this is what happened or this is what is going to be. Lynn, can you share with us the three distinctions that creates a leader, how leaders need, as we talk, as we mentioned, leaders are not born, but often some people can be born into a great leader. It's how they're being cultivated. But can you share with us, what are the three distinctions that separates one individual that wants to be a good leader or is a good leader, or the other person that is becoming a good leader? Can you share with us the three distinctions?
This is like an exam, Alka. That's a hard one. I think between great leaders and average leaders, great leaders are like the proverbial swan. They're gliding across the surface. The feet might be going like pistons underneath, but they always look as if they know what they're doing. And I would say that they provide certainty. Great leaders provide certainty in uncertain times. So that would be a really big one for me.
Right.
The second thing is that they're willing to admit that they don't have all the answers. So they're willing to listen to other people's ideas. And then but the third thing that separates the great leaders from the good ones is great leaders are decisive.
Decisive, exactly. You got it.
So provide certainty, they're decisive. And I think second one was, I was fumbling a bit there, but I think it is that be willing to be vulnerable in certain situations without losing your credibility as a leader. So be able to say, actually don't know what we're going to do next. So let's hear from other people. But then you take the decision. And it brings me back to a situation many, many years ago where a group of kids were going away and we had some information that suggested the people taking them away might have abused other children sexually. And in that situation, I had people out, it was like a task force, out kind of finding information, interviewing people, whatever. I drove 40 miles home to arrange babysitting and then came back and we rendezvoused again. And they all shared what they'd find out. And I said, okay, well, we don't have enough information to act. So they said, what are we going to do? And I said, we're just going to go home because that's it. There's nothing else we can do in this situation. And they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, you're all going to go home and have the night off and I'm going to go home and not sleep. But that's how it is. You make that decision. It was the right decision at the time. It was an uncomfortable decision. But as the leader, I had to let them all be freed up to go because I was taking the decision and I was the one that was going to live with it.
Right. Exactly. Well, it could go backward. It could go the other way around too. You're a good leader and you have all the good intentions of how your team members are feeling or how they are, to be more empathetic. And I think that's also, would you say that's the missing link as well in most organizations or even just, small business practices, that they are not empathetic, and you've got to be compassionate. Working with, as you worked in the health and social services, you had to be, working with children and families, which is a very, very delicate, situation that you had put yourself in, especially during the, Northern Ireland's political unrest at that time. You had to be compassionate. And I think compassion and empathetic are one of the key skills that's also neglected, that people don't, they find, and I'm seeing that more and more anyhow, that people are not compassionate and they are not empathetic to, to other people. But I think that stems from what we talked about. It starts with you. How can you show empathy? Can you be compassionate? So I think that's the bottom line, but people are just not doing that.
I think the other word I would add to that is kindness.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels like there's not enough kindness to go around. And, so working on that situation of always leave people better than you find them. Actually, what I'm seeing, Alka, is that there is growing emotional intelligence in
Uh-huh.
organizations nowadays. And with that is coming um, the empathy, the compassion, the kindness, the caring for others. So I do think that there's with all of the talk since COVID, maybe during and since COVID, about maintaining people's mental health with recognizing that our physical well-being is totally linked to our mental well-being, that we have to encourage and support our staff to be healthier generally. And that includes recognizing when people are stressed and overwhelmed and actually supporting them to take some space. I do think that there is growing emotional intelligence in organization, and that self-care, empathy, self-love,
Mhm.
um, and compassion for self as well as compassion for others. And as you say, we have to have compassion for ourselves. I do see that that is growing.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a great thing. That's growing. Then that's what's needed. How can you assess emotional intelligence? How can you assess with an individual their emotional intelligence?
Well, it's a question of whether they react or respond generally, isn't it? So when we're emotionally intelligent, we take that breath. If something triggers us, we take that breath and we wait for a minute before we respond. And that breath can be enough for us to stop reacting and stop taking it personally. And then just thinking, okay, if I ask a question here, I'll find out more about where that came from. Because sometimes people fire things at us and we go like, where did that come from? Or it comes across as hurtful,
Mhm.
or you feel and you and I've been in so many rooms where somebody gets defensive because maybe the person at the front of the room on the stage is trying to role play something, and the
Mhm.
person immediately gets defensive. Well, that goes nowhere. We have seen
Right.
those situations and we're all cringing for them. So the more emotionally intelligent we get, the more we recognize that we need to ask questions to better understand where the other person is coming from. We need to, first of all, understand what triggers us.
Right.
So, what triggers anger, what triggers guilt, what triggers frustration. Frustration's probably the most overused word in business these days. But what is it? So when we get triggered to frustration, it just means we're doing the same thing and we're expecting a different result.
Right.
So we have to understand what triggers us. And then we also have to, as leaders, figure out, well, what triggered Jimmy? Why did he suddenly react over here? So we need to better understand what triggers other people. And then we need to teach people by role modeling, by training courses, by having team discussions. We need to help people better moderate their emotions.
You know what just came to mind, Lynn? I will also add to your brilliant answer to the question is self-awareness.
Oh,
If
totally.
you're if you're not, you know what, and I will share with you, there were times I would react. Someone would say something to me and I didn't like it. I would immediately, rather than sort of seeing at that time, I'm talking about good 9 years ago, I would be more reactive and I immediately would react, oh, I don't want to know, don't tell me this, et cetera, et cetera. But now the same me, the same situation, somebody wants to say something to me, I'm more proactive. I want to listen to you. And I'm saying, oh, okay, sure. Tell me, Lynn, how do I do this? How would you suggest? So it's being self-awareness, having that self-awareness, what ticks you off, what triggers you in that moment, and how can you change? That's another thing. People don't want to change. And how can we expect that in organizations or within the culture that you mentioned? How can we adapt to that?
Yeah,
And how can you
first of
see
all,
that? Yeah,
first of all, you're so right. We need, by re-examining what it is that triggers us, we become much more self-aware. I think too, as leaders and with experience, and you said you're more mature 9 years later than, of
yeah,
course, we all are, provided we do that work on ourselves.
yes,
So I'm always working on myself. I went to India and studied suffering for 10 days, and we really looked at that, how pain is real, but suffering is a choice.
right.
So
Yeah,
10 days we studied that concept for, but it's amazing either through Tony Robbins, then through Success Resources, now through JT Fox. And through one of the podcasts that I'm loving at the moment is Andy Stanley's leadership podcast. And it's amazing how much reflection and self-awareness he personally does as a
right.
leader and encourages us to do as leaders. And then I've forgotten the question, Alka.
How can people change as we
Oh,
talked about?
change.
Yes, change.
Well, we have to stop trying to avoid change. Change is inevitable. Change is constant. It's how we embrace it that is
Right.
so, so important. And I liked what you said earlier about getting ahead of things. Tony Robbins always says the people who anticipate what's going to happen in the next couple of years are the people who are the great leaders. You have to work 2 or 3 or 4 moves ahead. Change is inevitable. So start looking what's going to change in your family and how do you prepare for it? What's going to change in your working life? Sometimes people get health issues thrust upon them and they have to work, how are we going to accommodate this change? Worked with someone this morning who that was a real issue for them. So we have to learn to embrace change and we have to learn to manage it. At organizational level, why change doesn't work very often. And let's face it, most organizational change comes a cropper at some stage. And the reason is why they understand the need to communicate the change for maybe the first 2 parts, and then they stop communicating it. And what, we change, we get buy-in from people and then we communicate. We issue the plan and we get the buy-in and we communicate. And then the next step is steps 1 to 2. And then we need to, after each one, come back and evaluate and communicate. And if it's
Yeah.
going well, we cheer and celebrate. If it's not going well, we work with people and we communicate how we're going to tweak it. But sometimes we tweak too soon because things have to get a chance to bed in. So change has to be managed, but the way to management is through engagement and communication.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, change is constant. We're always evolving. So the moment you don't want to change, you don't evolve, you stay the same, you at a plateau, that's the moment you start shrinking and you disintegrate. So as human beings, we don't want to do that. We're constant, we're always evolving, and this is the place that we want to be. Lynn, your
And it's
final.
fun. It's fun. It's fun to keep learning new things and evolve.
It is, absolutely. I mean, you did zip lining, so I commend you. I congratulate you on that. Good for you for doing that. I wanted to, but I chickened out.
Well, you
And
know why I did it? I chickened out
yes,
about 40 years ago
uh-huh,
and I had made excuses, but the real reason was I was too afraid to do it.
uh-huh.
So I had to, in my head, all these years, it was unfinished business. So this year I did it.
Good for you. And we celebrate you. That is amazing. Good for you. Lynn, your final question. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I really has been so enlightening. Thank you so much. Your final question. Every success that you've had, you worked with major corporations, you built the teams, you've elevated the team members, managers, and you opened your consultancy business 20 years ago. So very commendable. Everything that you have accomplished, if tomorrow you were to wake up and all your files are deleted Can you share with the audience 3 truths, meaning the three principles that the audience can take away from all your teachings?
Anything is possible.
Right.
If you're clear on what it is you want to achieve, if you have a plan, and if you surround yourself with the team that you need to get the job done. And I really, really do believe that. The second thing is, if it was all taken away tomorrow, rather than focus on loss, it's really important to focus on where we're at and where we came from and where we got to, and to be grateful for the things. Like, I am so grateful for our 3 sons, for my 3 wonderful daughter-in-laws. I would be grateful to have more grandchildren. I just have 1 at the moment. Just to be grateful for the opportunity of having been able to add value. And I think too many people, Alka, are looking up that mountain and looking at how far they have to go. And it's important sometimes to look back and think, look how far we came.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
And
is
just be thankful. Just be thankful. I mean, at the end of the day, we've all had good lives, all had lives that are worth living, and hopefully added value somewhere along the way.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Lynn. You certainly have added tremendous value for being on our show, for to our audience. Can you share with us as to where can people find you and how can we support you?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. Well, I have to say it's been an absolute pleasure. Really challenging too, really made me think some things out there. So that was really good. And I've made some notes as well. You can find me on LinkedIn, or my website is just www.lynnpeyton.com. Email me at lynn@lynnpeyton.com, and my podcast, Success is Never Accidental, is on Spotify.
Wonderful. That is so good. And we're more than happy. We'll drop the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to another episode of Ask the Experts podcast. And the takeaways that I want you to just really challenge is to know, as Lynn mentioned, number 1 is to be grateful that we have our health, as Lynn mentioned, to be grateful as to what you have today. And as Lynn also said, you need to celebrate even the smallest wins. And oftentimes we miss out that, oh, we need to have the bigger wins. Yes, the bigger wins will come. But what are you doing in the moment intermittently? The smaller wins that you have are going to lead to the bigger wins. So we are so grateful to Lynn Peyton to be on the podcast today. And we are grateful to each and every one of you who tunes in, and we want to add value to you every single day. So stay tuned for the next episode on Ask the Experts, whereby we bring amazing guests to add value. And so we want to challenge you every time, but stay tuned. And it's goodbye for now. And we want to welcome you. Thank you, Lynn. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. You've stopped the recording. Yeah,